Talking Paranormal.
So, hi everyone. This week I'm here with Erick of uNcomfortable podcast. Hi, Erick.
How you doing, Chris? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Can you tell us who you are and about your podcast?
Well, sure. I am Erick Szilagyi. I am the host and producer of uNcomfortable podcast here in the U.S. Started back February. It'll be 2 years, so still relatively new to the game. But recently started to get quite a bit of legs underneath the show, and it's becoming its own beast right now. So really excited about that. And you can find me on all the different podcast platforms, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google, Overcast, Cast this, Cast that, everything. Yeah. So I'm even on things I didn't even realize I'm on. So I guess now you can say, hey, Alexa, play uNcomfortable podcast, and it'll play it. So, but yeah, I just, I love the paranormal. I've been in it like head deep for forever. It seems like, we were just talking before we went on here. Had a wild fascination with UFOs by the time I was 5.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, there's just no real good way that I can say that I was oversaturated with information on the topics of the UFOs at 5 years old, because that would have been 1970. And, the odd occasion that you might catch a news broadcast that, gave you 2 sentences about maybe somebody saw something in the sky. The occasional rerun of Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, there just wasn't that much stuff out there. There was a lot of information, but for a 5-year-old, it was not obtainable, I guess is what I'm getting at. And that led into the Bermuda Triangle, which was something that fascinated me for years, and then Bigfoot, and as I've continued to grow and the older I've gotten, it's just gotten crazier and crazier with the, I guess I just, my parents did not do a disservice by like trying to shut me down when I was showing interest in this stuff. It wasn't like they encouraged me. It wasn't like, oh, you should go hunt ghosts, or you should go try to get abducted by an alien. It wasn't anything like that. But they never said, you got to give this stuff up, kid. This is the stuff of fantasy, and you need to focus on being an adult and, put away childish things. They never did that. So I think to some extent that helped with keeping my mind open to these things. I never really had a strong authority figure in my life say, this is crap, you need to let it go. So for that, I'm thankful. So
when you were a kid, did you, like me, get the big books of like Mysterious World? And like you say, I'd forgotten all about the Bermuda Triangle. But things like ESP and, spontaneous human combustion.
Yeah, that's funny that you say the spontaneous human combustion, because before we went on, you started talking about my first episode with the demonologist, and I told you that we had gone on a ghost tour there up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that he was the host of. We actually stood outside of the apartment complex for the first the book, the first time that I read about spontaneous human combustion. It was about an elderly woman who burned up in her chair in her apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we were standing outside of that apartment complex where that story took place. So that was one of the things as well. And I can remember in grade school looking through the book in the library, and it was a black and white photo of this charred up chair, and the woman's foot in the shoe and the ankle, and everything else was toast. So
burnt into your brain, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's really interesting, because I'd forgotten about that. But we stood right out in front of the apartment complex where that happened. But there was a book in our grade school library that half of the book was about Bigfoot, and the other half of it, I believe, was about the Bermuda Triangle. No, it was a Loch Ness Monster. So it was like it was almost a 2-sided book. You flipped over one and the cover was about Bigfoot, and on the back cover it was about Loch Ness. So that always fascinated me, and I think Loch Ness is something that is legitimate. I know the whole thing with that one photograph from the surgeon was proven to be a hoax. But so many other reports, and so far back in history, the number of accounts that had been written down in historical references. But unfortunately, I think maybe the last of its kind probably passed, like within our lifetime. Maybe when we were, you and I don't know how old you are, but maybe when I was in my younger years, because I don't think there's anything been really significant seen in the last 50 years that.
Well, I want to mention two things. The best thing that's been seen in the last 50 years was some sort of heat photograph, and it shows the lock from end to end, and there's a huge blip on this heat-seeking thing.
Really?
And it's meant to be the size of a transit van in comparison to the lake itself. But on the other side, I've heard a show by the leading guy on Loch Ness, and they've done DNA tests on all the sludge on the bottom of the loch, because if the thing is eating to survive, it will have to poo out.
Right. Sure.
Whatever. And so they're like, well, we'll find the DNA of it. We'll be able to, and all they can find is fish matter, which is kind of like, I'm the leading expert, yes, and I want it to be true, but I have to say the evidence is not there to support it.
Yeah.
And he's like, I hate to say it, but that's where we're at.
Well, eDNA collection is something that has, just, I don't know exactly how long it's been around, but it is relatively new as far as the process of collecting DNA. And it's a powerful tool. They use it here in the States a lot with looking for Sasquatch, Bigfoot, in the water tables, the streams, the waterfalls, areas that are known hotspots and have had multiple sightings throughout recent history. And again, just like your fella, it's nothing's really coming up as conclusive proof that there is something that we don't recognize there. But there can't be that many people just on a lark deciding to tell a lie, because so many of these people that I've talked to and that you see on other shows, or people like the one gentleman who runs the YouTube channel, howtohunt.com, here in the States anyway. He's out of British Columbia. He does a half hour to 45-minute video every 2 days, every 3 days. And all he does is read emails that are sent to him by people who've had experiences with Bigfoot encounters. They can't all be full of shit.
Yeah,
they can't.
I don't think that there's not something there, but I've got to get over the hurdle of it's just an animal. We don't know what kind it is.
I know, and the logical mind of mine says it's got to be something that is firmly planted in the physical realm here on our planet. And I think for the most part that it is.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of people that talk about the woo and the supernatural aspects that accompany being in the presence of these things, or being in the presence. They think that they're in the presence of these things. And the thing that I've found is, a lot of people talk about this cloaking or this camouflage.
Yes. Yeah.
And, I pay a lot of attention to Ron Moorhead. He's been a central figure in the Bigfoot community here in the States for over 50 years. He collected the Sierra sounds, which everybody over here knows. I don't know if it's as popular of a thing over on your side of the pond.
Haven't heard of it.
You've never heard of it. So if you go on YouTube and look up the Sierra sounds, it is a collection of recordings that were collected by Ron Moorhead and a friend of his named Al Berry. And Ron Moorhead used to go on a hunting trip every year up into the Sierra Mountains with several other gentlemen. It was inaccessible by vehicle. They would drive a certain amount of time. Then I believe there was like a 7-hour horseback ride to get to the place where they actually had their camp. And throughout several instances of being there, they would have these incredible sounds that would come from the woods. And they are, for somebody who has never heard them, when you hear them for the first time, you will get a sense of awe, because there is a pattern to the noises, there's a language being spoken.
Okay.
And there's multiple beings there engaged in a conversation. At some point you can't understand what they're saying. It's not, but there is something to the way the language is being spoke. There's one gentleman who listened to it coined the phrase samurai chatter. So it sounds almost Asianish.
Okay.
In its delivery, and it sounds, there's times where you hear it and almost sounds like it could be, somewhat like Russian influenced. And
yeah,
but there was a gentleman, his name escapes me now, but his son was doing a report for school, and everybody had to choose a subject, and the last subject, and that subject was Bigfoot. So he did a weekend report on Bigfoot. He asked his dad to help him because he didn't know anything about Bigfoot. And they came across the Sierra Sounds. This gentleman, the dad, just happened to be a retired naval cryptolinguist who had spent 22 years of his professional life decrypting and deciphering foreign languages with different dialects and different modalities from throughout the world, all things that were related to national intelligence. And he was very good at his job. So when he heard that, he's like, there's something here, so he spent an inordinate amount of time breaking down and doing lectures on the Sierra Sounds and the fact that, yes, this is an actual language. There are things that repeat throughout. There are exclamations, there are terminations at the ends of sentences, there are retorts from another being. He feels that there are 3 of them involved in the conversation. So when you listen to it, it's very bizarre.
Yeah.
And the one thing I can tell you is that every time that I've ever played those sounds while having a dog present in my room, in my studio, or at a friend's house, every time, if there is a dog in the room, that dog visibly becomes uncomfortable and does not like what it's hearing.
Wow.
Which falls into line with what a lot of people say about their dogs just basically being out in the woods and shutting down. Super aggressive, very protective dogs. They don't want anything to do with it. They just kind of cower. So yeah, if you haven't heard the Sierra Sounds, absolutely look into it. And I hosted a Bigfoot conference here in the States, about a half hour away from me, back in early part of September. And I actually had Ron Moorhead come as our lead speaker for that convention. And it was a small thing. It wasn't a huge convention, but it was wildly successful, beyond my imagination. I was thrilled with the day that turned out. But he has some very he has some very I don't even he has some theories that are more closely related to quantum entanglement because of all the woo stuff, and he's actually experienced some of the woo stuff. He's seen the lights in the woods up there in the Sierras. He saw a a rod that he described, somewhat like a lightsaber from Star Wars, just a bar of light that came floating through the woods and was being navigated because it wasn't running into anything. It was just traversing through the trees and everything. And then as it passed their encampment, it kind of continued off and then just disappeared. So he does subscribe to the fact that there are things that are very strange about being in the presence of these things. And his daughter saw one walk out in front of her. And once they had gotten back from their trip, he then started to have experiences at his home, which he can't really reconcile, because there was never anything happening at his home before. And now, after having a physical sighting with his daughter, now he's having the presence of these things in and around his home. That is something that's very reminiscent of my episode 2 and 3, opening day. I had a gentleman on who I know personally. I didn't know at the time that this had happened to him, but years later I find out he had one walk out in front of him and 3 other people in his hunting group at a piece of property where they hunted about 40 minutes away from their home. Well, after that experience, his daughters had witnessed, 2 of his daughters had witnessed one on their property at their homestead 40 miles away, just kind of out of the blue. They'd never had anything going on at their house before, but after having witnessed one, 40 miles away, that if you were a bipedal human, 40 miles is a long way to be able to track somebody.
Yeah.
What are they using? Are they using their scent? Are they do they have some kind of communication that they can get to another group that is closer, and then that passes to the next and to the next until they get to somebody that, is living in the woods near these people? I mean, none of it makes sense.
No.
But nevertheless, they had experiences on their property.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, when I had worked with this gentleman, we were both working at a school, and I had to go on to nights for my regular job. And those night hours were, I think it was from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening. So it wasn't really screwing up my sleeping pattern. I was still getting home at a decent time at night, and, I'd find myself still waking up at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I knew the tech director, the technologies director at the school. And he said, "Hey, you ever think about doing a part-time gig? I got a spot open. If you want, you can come in and help us out." So I was like, I had 2 kids in college, and I thought, yeah, shit, I'll do that because it'll be nice extra money. And it was a pretty decent paying part-time job. And one of the times my boss came down and asked me, "I need you to go install the software on this gentleman's computer." So I went down to his room, and sure enough, he's got a Bigfoot poster. It's a picture of one of the still frames from the Patterson-Gimlin film, but on the poster it had the reticle of a scope, like somebody was getting ready to shoot her. And I saw it up there, and I was always a big fan of Bigfoot, so I saw the scope reticle on there, and I was like, "Oh, this is one of those guys that he thinks it's a joke and just killed Bigfoot or whatever." So I never really got into a conversation with him about it. And so I was asked to go down to his room and install the software, and the software I was putting on his computer was kind of like a DVR software. And when I got it installed, it came up with like 7 different screens, and I just asked the guy, I said, "Hey, Chris, what is this? What's this for?" I said, "It looks like it's some kind of recording device." And he says to me, excuse me, he says, "Well, we've been having problems at the house, and I put up a bunch of cameras and some pressure plates in my driveway so that if anything happens while I'm here at school and it activates the cameras, it'll kick in and show me here at school so I can see what's going on, because sometimes my daughters are home by themselves, sometimes my wife is home by herself." And I just assumed it was, bad kids in the neighborhood, or, some unsavory character trying to break into their barn or something like that. But basically what it was is he was putting those cameras up because two of his daughters had an experience right there on his property. And that's a considerable amount of money to wrap up into equipment just because you're being weird and thinking that there's something there that's not. So it's kind of crazy. It really is. I don't understand the woo aspect of it. I'm enthralled by it. I think it's very strange, and it seems to be very consistent as far as the types of things that are happening to people. Like the mind speak and stuff like that. You hear about that a lot, and I don't know. I don't know where to put all that.
Yeah, I mean, Bigfoot is enough in itself. Then saying that they have some otherworldly ability, that's just a mind breaker.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it from I try to look at it from a different standpoint. I try to look at it from the standpoint of we have had walls and windows and roofs around us for so long now. We are a civilized group of people. We don't have to worry about staying dry at night. We don't have to worry about some kind of predator coming into our camp and picking us off one by one as we sleep. We don't have to worry about a marauding group of other transient people coming in to take our stuff. We're very comfortable people now. We can lock our doors, we can lock our windows, and for the most part, nothing can get in, right? But if you never evolved down that path, I got to think that our ancestors, those who still slept out underneath the stars and had to create fire to stay warm and had to hunt for their food on a daily basis, we were probably more acute to our environment. We probably had more senses. We say we have 5 senses. Well, I think we probably had more. I don't know if we necessarily had more senses, but the senses we had were much more acute. I think we've gotten dumbed down the longer that we've been civilized and safe and not have to worry about this and worry about that. So if you have something that has continued to live a natural life out in the woods, living off the land, staying hidden, it kind of makes sense that their senses would be a more acute than what we have. I think that a lot of people seem to think that these things know that they're in the woods well before they know that they're there, and they probably do. They probably have much more keen hearing, and their eyesight is probably better. And, obviously their size and their strength have to go hand in hand. So if you start talking about somebody who's, say 5'9", and he's a bodybuilder or a power lifter, and he can lift 1,200 pounds deadlift. Well, if you start talking about something that has natural strength and is 8 feet tall, that the strength of that has to be incredibly more vast than what the bodybuilder or the power lifter can do. So I don't know. It's such a strange thing, and it's so prevalent, and it's all over the world. There's almost no place that you can't find at least one report of these things. And to me, there can't be that many people lying. And if they all of them are lying except for one person, there's still that one truth out there that, I don't know. To me, it just makes complete sense that something like that could be possibly living out in the woods, and I've had a couple of experiences to me that at the time when it happened, even though I was still into the subject of Bigfoot, it wasn't something that jumped into my mind that, oh my God, it was Bigfoot. It wasn't until years later when I started hearing really similar stories about what I had happened. That I start putting two and two together. And it's like, man, maybe that was really weird. And it did happen. I wasn't nuts. So, what else could it have been? So, and what I'm talking about is actually being on a piece of property hunting for deer in Southwest Michigan, and I did not have permission to hunt on the property adjacent to where I was at. But it was a very interesting piece of property. It was just aesthetically, when you looked at it, it was just a neat piece of property. And I always found myself being fascinated by it because there were so many different aspects to it. There was a regular forest area, and then there was an area that was just strictly pine trees that were huge pine trees, very old. They had a ton of turkey in there. Then there was kind of a path that ran through there that seemed to be pretty heavily traveled as far as a game trail. And then on the other side of that, there were a few more pine trees. And then on the end of that, there was like a wetland area where a pretty good sized stream ran through it. There was tall grasses. You could see where all the grass was matted down from during the evening. The deer would bed down there. And it was just a cool piece of property. So one day it got the better of me, and I decided to leave my weapon on the piece of property that I was hunting, and I walked onto the property I didn't have permission to be on. And I know it was wrong and I shouldn't have done it, but I walked in there and I didn't have my gun with me. It wasn't like I was trying to shoot something that was not on the property I had permission for. I just wanted to walk around, and I walked into that piece of property, probably a good 75 yards. And I was staying on that game trail path. And I got to the point where I could see way off in the distance, I could see the corner of the house that was on that property. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. I went too far. So I turned around and I started walking back, but I was walking slowly, and I was really just looking around and trying to take everything in because it was such a diverse piece of property. And I noticed something started walking behind me. And I immediately was like, oh crap. It's the landowner. And he's just gonna ream my butt for being on his property. So, I stopped, and I had my hands down at my side so he could see I wasn't carrying a weapon. And I just waited. I waited for him because I knew he was going to. I'm sorry, I got a piece of hair. It's floating around in my face. I just waited for him to just like unload on me and start yelling at me, for being on his property. And he didn't do it. So I kind of started walking again, and I took one or two steps, and then I heard the footsteps in the leaf litter behind me walking the same way. And I stopped, and it stopped. And then I started again, and it started again. And this time I was like, I got like chills all over my body, and I got super excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is like a trophy-sized buck that's following me back to my stand. I in my head, I was like, this is a huge deer, and there was a chance that, the hunting clothing that I had on, I might've had deer estrus on me from a previous hunt. Maybe that's what it was smelling. It was about the time for, the rut. So maybe he was confused by the smell and thought I was a weird looking doe. I don't know. But then I was like, oh my God, this thing is going to follow me all the way back. And I've got a perfect chance to get a huge, in my head, it was a 12-point buck, and it was just going to be the biggest thing anybody's ever seen, So now I'm getting excited rather than being, I've completely got out of my mind that it was the landowner. Now it's like, this is a deer. And I stopped again, and it took two more steps, and it stopped. And I had maybe 10 yards to go before I was back to where my seat and my shotgun was. So I start formulating in my head. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get to the tree fall where my seat is at. I'm gonna reach over with one hand, really slowly pick up my shotgun, pull it up in front of me so it can't see me moving that much. Get my hand on the trigger, my hand on the forearm, and then I was gonna spin at the waist to the left, and it's gonna be right behind me. and I'll just, typically that's not a great shot, but at that close a range, going through the breastplate, it would have been fine. So I did exactly that. I got to the point where I could reach my gun. I pulled it up in front of me, and I immediately started to turn at the waist to the left, and I heard just this massive exhale of air, and I heard thump thump. I didn't hear thump 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 thump. I just heard thump thump. And I mean, I spun around immediately, and there was nothing there. And I took 2 quick steps back onto the property, fully expecting to see this massive white tail, pouncing off into the woods. But there was nothing, and there were no twigs that were like whipping back and forth. There was no leaf that was, gently settling to the ground. There was nothing that was disrupted. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that there was anything behind me at all. And I was like, shit, I was so close, and in my head, it was a deer. So it was, when I decided to walk onto that property, it was very close to the end of hunting time for that day. And then after that, I was just like, I grabbed my stuff and I exited the woods, which wasn't too far. And I walked along the field that ran along the tree line, parallel to the tree line. And as I was walking back to where my car was parked, the tree line was on my left-hand side, and I could hear very distinctly 2 footsteps. I've had a dog my whole life. I've heard dogs walk. They've got 4 legs. It's very recognizable. I've been in the woods a lot where I've seen many deer. So when you have something that has 4 legs, it's got a distinctive canter to it when you hear them walking. And this sounded like somebody was walking in the woods, maybe 10 or 15 feet into the tree line. And it was relatively dark by this point, and I had a really good flashlight with me. I've got a flashlight fetish, so I've got like a million different flashlights, and the smaller I can get and the brighter I can get, it seems to be like a challenge for me. So I had this really good flashlight, and I'm shining it into the tree line as I'm walking back to my car, fully expecting to see a doe or a buck or something walking, and there was nothing. Nothing was being disturbed. I couldn't see any twigs on any low-lying branches on any of the bushes. Nothing. And it walked alongside of me 2/3 of the way back to my car, and it just stopped.
That's amazing.
That was a weird situation. It was an odd thing that happened. I have no explanation for it. Was it Bigfoot? I can't tell you that because I didn't see anything. But after years of hearing other people's experiences, it does fall in line and is very consistent with what many people report. So I don't know where I'm at on that.
But you must have had even in a forest, you must have had a good 30-foot line of sight to the next tree.
Oh yeah, at least probably double that. Yeah.
So even if it was me behind you, I couldn't.
You couldn't
hide.
Disappear. No. And even if you could, even if you were lucky enough to have something that you could have jumped behind that would have hid your presence, there still would have been some kind of external, a twig on one of the branches of one of the trees would have been moving because you bumped into it, or you disrupted some leaves, or something. And there literally was nothing. It was like I was there by myself. So it was very strange.
So that's possibly a cryptid story and possibly a huge spirit following you. I don't know, but I know that some of the stories you have on spirits are also equally as amazing. Now I'm starting to wonder, what is it about you that brings these stories?
That's a good point that you bring up, and it's something that I struggled with for a long time. Because I guess when I started doing uNcomfortable, I would have guests on that would have something that was, I would have had an experience that was something that I could relate to them. So they knew that I was not sitting there in judgment of them, and that I had had weird things, maybe similar to what they had. And I would talk about some of them on the show. But I said to my kids, there's times where I've told my kids some of the things, or a lot of the things that have happened to me throughout my life. And I know they believe me. I know they know that their dad would never lie to them about something like this. But there's still a little bit of an air of, is dad off his rocker?
Yeah.
They've never said that, but I can, and I can't fault them for it, because I would feel the same way. So, not too long ago, I think the episode aired on the Confessionals podcast at the beginning of August. And on the Confessionals, we ended up talking a lot about the experience I had when I did interview a Native American witch. And I think it's episode 5 of mine, that's called Dinner with a Witch. And the entire episode turned into talking about all of the weird things that happened during my recording of that episode, because I actually recorded that with her at her home. And there were a number of her experiences that left me just jaws hanging open and not knowing what the hell had just happened. But then Tony from the Confessionals, he said, man, that was a banger of an episode. If you got more things to talk about. And I said, I had not even really touched on any of the things that I've experienced through my life. So we did an additional overtime episode that was like for his paid members.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I ever really went into like everything that I could remember from being a young man to, being a full grown adult, all of the weird things that I cannot assign a normal explanation to. And I think that episode probably went close to 90 minutes. And at the end of it, I was like, man, people are going to think I'm an absolute lunatic. And, that I'm crazy, because the number of things that I've had happen or been experienced. But honestly, I mean, I guess the argument could be made that I'm talking about all these different crazy things I've had happen because I have a paranormal podcast. And I guess, it's a valid argument, but those are the things that led me to ending up wanting to do a podcast about paranormal. It's because I wanted to hear other people's experiences and kind of validate or try to explain some of the things I've had happen throughout my life. But yeah, I've had a number of things. And I think before we went on and started recording, I told you that my parents didn't necessarily encourage any of this with me. But when I showed an interest in these kinds of weird things, they never shut it down. They never told me, put that away. That's kid stuff. It doesn't exist. Again, they didn't encourage me. They weren't like, oh yeah, you ought to go ghost hunting, or, yeah, definitely Bigfoot really is real. It was never that, but they never tried to shut it down either. And yeah. I think that, I think people can be, I think they can be closed off from the weird stuff because of how they grew up, how they were influenced. Maybe you went to a church that, whatever church you belong to says that, ghosts and things like that are all demonic and you shouldn't have anything to do with it. So you shut off from that. You don't pay attention to that. You don't watch the ghost shows. You don't watch paranormal shows. You don't listen to podcasts like yours or mine. And, when it's out of sight and out of mind, you don't really have any reason to think about it.
No.
I've always been very open to there's more going on than what we really can understand, and I don't think there's any experts, there's no experts in these fields, you can have the greatest team paranormal investigators out there who are doing things by the book and, doing it as scientifically as they can. And they're getting great evidence and they're getting things that are just not explainable. But that's the problem. They're not explainable. You can't push yourself up against the crutch of science and rely on it to prove the things that you've caught, because science doesn't support it. At least yet.
Just your phone call from your father after he'd passed, I was like, I'm on board. This guy, I believe in what he says, and that's life-changing in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then you and your daughter seeing the orb, a real orb, like you
absolutely,
saw die, an orb of light, and that's the only second time I've heard an orb story where I'm like, yeah, that's an orb.
Yeah.
A glowing ball of light that you follow, not that you take on a photograph and it's dust.
Right.
You both, and you witnessed that with your daughter as well.
Yeah.
So just to take those, I thought he must have loads more stories. But yeah, if you want to quickly touch on your father's phone call.
Yeah, sure. I wish, these things, when you tell people about them and they hear the story, they're like, oh my God, that's insane. That's crazy. How do you not know when that happened? How is that not something that you like absolutely know the date that happened? And it's a valid question. It was weird. It was, I guess to some extent it was life-changing. But I can't tell you exactly when it happened. I didn't start having any kind of weird paranormal experiences after my dad passed for quite some time. And I'm going to say it was somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 8 to 12 months after he had passed, and we had a weird relationship, growing up as a child. He was a great dad. I loved him to death. He was a good guy. It wasn't like he abused me or beat me or anything. But he had some demons that he was dealing with from being in the military and stuff like that. And, once in a blue moon, he would start to drink, and it would be, he drank until the bottle was gone. He wasn't what you would consider a normal alcoholic who came home from work and drank a 6-pack or a 12-pack after every day. He only drank like once every 3 months. But as soon as he opened the bottle of Jack Daniels, he didn't stop drinking until it was gone, and that was, I didn't like him when he was drunk. It was uncomfortable to be around. He would talk weird. Every once in a while he'd let things out about, when he was in the military, and it wasn't something that a kid of my age needed to hear. It was like, it was just weird. And at the time that he passed, when he was hit and killed by the car, we were kind of at a stage, I was from 18, 19, 20 years old. I was trying to become myself. I was trying to become my own man. And he was having a problem letting go of that. So we kind of butted heads a little bit, and it wasn't anything that was terrible, but there was definitely not the closeness that we had enjoyed as a young man growing up with his dad. And that kind of sucked, because, there were things that I really enjoyed doing with him. Really liked going fishing and, going on vacations and stuff like that. Was always a lot of fun. But during that 18, 19, 20, my hormones are going nuts. I'm more interested in girls and hanging out with my friends. And, he's feeling bad because his kid is kind of blowing him off. And
yeah.
So we didn't have a great relationship during the time. But, maybe 6 or 8 months before he was killed, we kind of started getting back on track. And it was nice to be able to enjoy each other's company again, and hang out and not feel weird. And, it was getting back to where it was. and then boom, he gets hit and killed by a car. So that was kind of emotionally for me. I did not want to deal with the emotions of that.
Yeah.
So it took me months before I cried about my dad being dead, you know. And it was powerful. It wasn't something that I really enjoyed going through.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8, 9, 10 months later, I get this wild hair up my butt, and I decide to go buy a new phone. And at this point in 1987, early 1988, cordless phones are starting to become a thing for the house. And I had a pretty decent job, and I was getting good paychecks. So I went to one of these big electronic warehouses, and I bought a cordless phone. And it was still the size of a regular landline, and you had to pull out this really long antenna. And you know, it was great, but by today's standards, it was crap compared to what we have now with cell phones. And then I thought, I'm going to buy an answering machine too. So I spent a lot of money, and I bought this telephone and this answering machine because, you know, at 21 years old, I'm that important that I can't miss a phone call. And you know, I had those set up in my room, and one night the phone rings, and I popped up, and it was, you know, in the neighborhood around 2:00. It could have been a little past, it could have been a little before, but it was right around 2 in the AM. And I answered the phone, and I said hello, and there's this male voice on the other end of the phone that says, "Hey, boy." And for the majority of my life, my name was not Eric when it came out of my dad's mouth. It was boy. You know, "Hey, boy, go cut the grass. Hey, boy, you want to go wash the car? Hey, boy, you want to go fishing?" You know, it just was. And it wasn't a derogatory term coming out of his mouth. That was just how he referred to me, as "Hey, boy." And man, I heard that voice on the phone, and I was like, "Hello?" And it, you know, like a lot of people nowadays, they don't understand what it was like to have a landline. But when a landline phone call would be disconnected, or one person on one end would hang up, it would go eh, 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 and that's what it did. It was like whoever called me and said that hung up the phone, and then I heard the disconnect of it. And I remember sitting there looking at the phone in my hand, and like looking around my room, and I'm like, I'm awake. This is, you know, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't a hallucination, an auditory hallucination. I was awake, and I just got this really weird sensation, and I can't even put it into words what it was. It was I don't know. It was a realization. It was holy shit, that was my dad. You know, and I put the antenna back down, and I laid it back in its cradle that it would sit in, and I didn't even get my arm pulled back from putting the phone away, and the phone rang again. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, there was a part of me that, man, my butt cheeks puckered, because I was like, I didn't want to answer it, but I wanted to hear him again. But I wasn't ready to like have a conversation with my dad, who's been dead almost a year.
Yeah.
But I grabbed the phone and I answered it again, and there's a woman's voice on it, and she says, "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Is there anybody in the house that shouldn't be there?" And I was like, "Who is this?" And, you know, I'm like, it's the middle of the night. I'm sleeping. And it was a representative of our local law enforcement who was in my town. And she basically made me stay on the phone with her, get up out of bed, walk throughout the whole house, make sure that there was nobody in the house that shouldn't be there. And there wasn't at the time. It's a long story of why nobody else lived in the house, but my mom had moved out. And I was still living in my mom and dad's home. And so I walked through the whole house, and I confirmed to her that there was nobody else in the house. And she said, okay, well, do you have a cordless phone? And I said, yes, I do. Why? And she says, well, we've been having problems with cordless phones automatically dialing 911. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would it automatically dial 911? But, it's possible. I don't know why she would have said it if it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
And she said that they had received a 911 call from that phone. And I said, how long ago? And she said, just a couple of minutes ago.
Mm.
Well, that puts it at the same time that my phone call with what sounded like to be my dad. So, the fact that my mom wasn't living in the house with me anymore, was he concerned that I wasn't being taken care of? Did he feel that I was like in jeopardy because I was by myself? And that's the standpoint that I've kind of taken from that ever since that happened.
Yeah.
But more recently, after having told this story a couple of times, I'm starting to look at it from a little bit different perspective. Was he calling 911 because he was confused? Did he not know that he had passed away? Was he calling 911 because he had been hit and killed by a car? That kind of has started to come into my frame of thought when I look back on this experience. Will I ever know? I doubt it, but
if I can interject.
Sure, absolutely.
Spirits that we've spoke to, when they're on the other side, they suddenly know if they've had lives before the one they've just passed on from. Mm-hmm. They all say that you reincarnate on this earth into 8 lives. You reincarnate 7 times between, and you don't remember what goes on in the afterlife until you're back in the afterlife. You come down and your memory's wiped pretty much.
Right.
You gain experiences and go back. And then when you're over there again, you're like, oh yeah, I'm on the 4th life now, and I'm going to choose this one. But then you forget again until you go back. So if that is true, and I'm only telling you what spirits have told me, that's all I know. Your father would instantly know he was dead, if that's to be believed. Do you know what I mean? Whether that stands for anything at all, Eric, I don't know. But
sure.
We for 12 years of using a Ouija board and asking each random spirit, is there reincarnation? Yep, okay. So is there multiple lives, and what life are you on? And they come out with different numbers. And they all seem to agree on that.
That's interesting. And that kind of takes me to something that a couple of months ago I did an episode with Archbishop Christina Rake, and she is out of the old Catholic Church, Episcopalian church in Chicago, Illinois. I'm telling you, man, that's a great episode, and she has so many interesting things to talk about. I would highly suggest anybody go listen to that. I believe the name of the episode was God and the Paranormal. She's written a book that's called God and the Paranormal. And, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I'm not practicing now. But, it was always my impression that the Catholics did not encourage and actually, looked down on anybody who was dealing with any kind of paranormal stuff. And it was all, it's all bad and it's all demonic and you don't mess with any of that stuff. And It was all very secretive and hush hush, and they didn't talk about it. But she's of the old Catholic faith, before the newer version of what many of us have. And she says that there's places in the Bible that do confirm the recycling of souls. You know, she's like, not many people know where to look for it, and they don't know how to interpret it, but it is there. You know, and I thought that was a strange thing to get from somebody who is a archbishop in the church. That's a pretty stout confirmation that that we recycle, and that our souls, you know, go through a number of different tries here on this world, and it's all about creating a higher self, and
Exactly.
becoming a more ascended version of what we're supposed to be. And you know, to me, as weird as that sounds and as out there as it sounds, that makes perfect sense to me in my head. You know, it's you know, and maybe I'm just a goof, man. Maybe I'm just too open to all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, it all makes sense. You know, but I've got a really good gut instinct, and it's served me very well throughout my life, as far as people that I should not be associated with, about places I shouldn't go, you know, putting myself into certain situations. I've talked about this on other shows that, you know, I was a bouncer in a bar in my early and mid 20s. And it got to the point when I was working at this bar, when you walked in at 7:30, 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, I knew that you were going to be a happy drunk. I knew if you were going to start crap with your girlfriend. I knew if you were going to try to get into it with somebody else. I knew. I mean, when you walked in, I was so tuned into the different personalities that were coming into that place that and many times it worked out just like what I had anticipated. I knew when you came in, if I looked at you and I was like, yep, this guy's going to be trouble at some point during that night, you did something that screwed up and I'd have to go talk to you or make you leave. You know, so my gut instinct, I think, is very, very keen and very attuned to my environment. So, you know, when I start having these experiences, if something was off kilter and it was like, yeah, you're just making shit up now, it would show itself. And it just hasn't. You know, there's while I was working at that bar, I started dating the woman that I ended up marrying for 20 plus years. And there for a while, she would come to the bar every night that I worked. And I think it was more to like keep an eye on me, you know, make sure I wasn't doing anything, because it was easy to do things in that environment. But after a while, she got tired of it, and I was growing tired of doing the job myself, because, you know, late nights, and quite honestly, you know, a lot of good people, but a lot of people that you just probably don't want to be around as well.
Yeah.
And you know, nothing good happens at 3 o'clock in the morning when people are drinking. But she would start staying at my house, which is the same house that my mom and dad had lived in. So she had essentially started pretty much living with me. And she got to the point where she wouldn't come down on some nights. She would stay at the house. And I remember one night I called her, and it was fairly early in the evening, like 9 p.m., 10 p.m., something like that. I went in the back, took a bathroom break, and I called her from the phone back there. And I asked her if she was coming down tonight. And she goes, no, I think I'm going to stay here and just listen to the symphony. And I was like, what? Because she didn't listen to symphonic music. It was, she had been in the one room, and she heard what she said sounded like The shelving in the cupboards where all the pots and pans were, like the shelf had given loose, and all the pots and pans just started crashing. And I'm like, oh man, and I'm thinking, it's like, shit, now I got to fix the cupboards,
Yeah.
But she says she went into the kitchen and opened up the cabinets, and everything was stacked nice and neat, and there was nothing in the kitchen to indicate that anything had fallen or tipped over or anything. It was just weird. And we kind of laughed about it. And she's like, I'm not really scared. It's weird and it's a little uncomfortable, but I don't feel like, I'm not scared to be here. And I said, all right, well, if anything else happens, tell me when I get home. And so there was that instance, and then there was another time. We'd been living here together for a good while, probably 6 or 8 months. And we used to get into an argument because I was always of the opinion that if you're going to be in a relationship, don't be that guy who leaves everything up to the woman to do. All the housework, all the washing the dishes, all the cooking, all that stuff doesn't all have to fall on a woman. And I like to cook. So, I would do my part as far as trying to help out, making sure that the house is taken care of instead of just leaving it all up to her. And one of those things was doing laundry. And apparently, though, I didn't know how to do laundry well enough for her because it was always an area of contention. And we had been talking, and I think it was like a Sunday afternoon, and we were going to stick around the house. We were going to get the house cleaned up, do laundry. I was going to cook dinner. And she said she was going to go take a shower. So I went into the bedroom. I got the clothes basket with all the dirty laundry. I took it downstairs, and I was going to do laundry. Only this time I was going to make sure that I separated the whites and the colors and all this stuff so that there weren't going to be anything to argue about. And I got down there and I set the basket down on the ground, and the phone rang upstairs. Again, it's still just a landline. So I went upstairs, answered the phone, and it was my mom. And we talked for, 20 minutes, a half hour maybe. And I got off the phone. I went back downstairs, and every piece of clothing, towels, everything that was in that laundry basket that I had taken downstairs was thrown out of the basket and strewn across the basement. And the basement had two sides to it. It had a wall that ran down the middle of the basement. This is a ranch style house. So one side of it was finished, where it was kind of like the nicer part of the basement, and the other side was the utility side. Well, not only were the clothes and the towels and everything thrown on the utility side, but there were some of it that was thrown onto the side that was the finished part. And I went down there and I immediately just got furious. I was like, God damn it, here we go again. She had to start shit, and I went stomping up the stairs, and I walked down the hallway, and I opened up the door to the bathroom, and I'm like, hey, what the hell are you doing? I'm trying to help out. I'm trying to do the best I can, and you just go down there and you throw everything around, and, and she pulls the curtain back in the shower, and she sticks her head out, and she's like, what in the hell are you talking about? And I said, all the clothes down in the basement. I said, what the hell are you throwing everything around for? I said, I'm just trying to help. If you don't want me to help, fine. I won't do another goddamn thing around here. And then it dawned on me, and it's like, she took long showers. I mean, it was ridiculous. She would take like half-hour showers that, the steam wouldn't leave the bathroom for, half the day. She'd been in there so long. And it dawned on me, it's like, she went into the bathroom to take a shower before I even took everything down there.
Yeah.
And she's been in here ever since. And I was like, well, what the hell? So I went back downstairs, And I picked everything up and, I separated the laundry the way it's supposed to be. And I started doing the wash. Of course, she got mad at me because when I turned the washing machine on, it took water away from the shower that she was taking. So I still got yelled at for it. But, it just was like, well, what the hell are we dealing with here? Is this my dad still messing around? Is this something else? Not necessarily bad or good.
Yeah.
But is this something else that now that I'm awakened to having had the experience I did with my dad, are there other things coming through? That is this just a playful entity or ghost that, decided to have a little bit of fun with me? And not too long after that, this time I went to take a shower. Not the same day, but as far as the span of time, relatively close to the same time. I went and took a shower and I got done. I opened up the curtain, grabbed a towel, and I looked across at the sink, and the sink was about to overflow onto the floor. And, the little stopper that closes the sink off, it was open. It should have been draining. But both the hot and cold handles were wide open, and the amount of water that was pouring in there was more than it could accept down to the drain. So it was getting ready to flow over. And I went to shut it off. And I mean, that's the sink that I have used like the majority of my life, because I lived in this house almost my entire life. And I could hardly get them to shut off. It was like they were just cranked as hard as they could be. And finally I got them to shut off. And I remember yelling out the door. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Why'd you leave the water running? It almost overflowed onto the floor. And she's like, I haven't been in here. That wasn't me. So again, was that, are they doing something? Is he doing something to get my attention, just to let me know that he's around?
That's normally what happens. Yeah, we go to places and it's things like moving things around and just nuisance things to us. But it's like they're stood in front of you going, you can't see me, can you? Right, I'll do this. I'll throw, and you're like, God damn it. But I think something was getting your attention. Are you still in that house now?